Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending the workshop today. Today, we're going to be talking about navigating support systems in Alberta, specifically for autism, behavior, and mental health. My name is Leslie Shu, and I am a registered provisional psychologist from Communication Services. As we gather here today, we acknowledge we are on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. We pay our respects to the First Nations and the Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. Just a quick table of contents for what we are talking about today. We are going to have a quick overview of autism spectrum disorder, then looking at behavior needs, and children and youth mental health, followed by looking at resources, clinics, advocacy, and so on. So, why does this topic matter? Well, as a psychologist, I often see the challenges that families face when trying to navigate systems in Alberta. Parents have come in, they're often already exhausted and stressed, trying to figure out where to start and who can actually help them. When I talk to some teachers and staff, they often say, I want to do more, but I don't know where to start. And they're not even sure which community supports exist. Even providers sometimes can work in their own little areas and then struggle to provide a clear roadmap for families about different areas. So, what we're going to do is we're going to take a step back, we're going to look at the bigger picture. And my goal is to help you feel more confident in navigating as well as understanding the supports available in the province. And so this session really is for parents, caregivers, teachers, school staff, educational assistants, service providers, as well as community partners, and anyone that is interested in understanding and learning about autism, behavioral, and mental health needs. So in 2022, 1 in 50 children and adolescents were diagnosed with autism. It's about 2% of the population. And so, being in the area of teaching and education, you really can't claim that you don't want to work with autistic people or that you don't have or know the strategies. Because the reality is that these individuals are going to be in your classroom, whether they officially have a diagnosis or not. And it is critical to understand the supports that they need, even at a classroom general level. Just a quick note is that there previously was a diagnosis that was called Asperger's. And so this was for individuals who had the higher IQ and not as severely impacted in their functional impairment. However, that actually is now considered under the umbrella of autism spectrum disorder. One important thing that I always like to start with when talking about autism is this quote by Dr. Stephen Shore. So, if you have met one person with autism, you have met one person with autism. This comes from the understanding that autism really exists on a spectrum of so many different factors and unique combinations of strengths as well as areas of needs, and that there really is no one way that it presents, despite maybe what popular media or culture tells us. So, what is autism spectrum disorder? Well, it is defined in the DSM 5 TR as a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts, along with restricted repetitive behaviors and interests and activities. Symptoms must also be present from early childhood and cause clinically significant impairment in functioning. I understand that that definition sounds very clinical, but in practice, what this means is that autism affects the way a child communicates, interacts with others, and experiences the world. Some children may have very clear communication differences, while others might be more subtle. And because it's a spectrum, each individual presents with their own unique combination of strengths as well as challenges. So, autism shows up in daily life in many different ways. For some children, communication can be a challenge. Things like keeping a conversation going, reading body language in a peer, or using gestures don't come as naturally. Socially, we might see kids who prefer to play on their own. Maybe they struggle to pick up on some of those hidden rules that guide social relationships. And research has shown that social and communication differences can really contribute to things like peer rejection and isolation, especially during late childhood and adolescent years. And so that makes support from their peers as well as adults so important. Another big piece that autism can show up in daily life is through sensory processing. So, children might be sensitive to things like sounds, lights, even textures, and sometimes they actually don't notice sensory input at all. And so, these sensory differences are actually closely tied to how children function in their day to day and how easily they can engage in different scenarios. But alongside some of those challenges, there are also real strengths. So many children with autism have excellent memory for facts and details. They have deep and really focused interests. They also have a refreshingly honest and unique way of seeing the world. In fact, research does show that special interests are present in most autistic individuals, as many as 90%. And so when those interests are supported by adults and supportive people around them, it can actually help boost learning, mental health, and even open doors for future careers. So when I talk to support people, I remind them autism isn't just about difficulties, it's about differences. If we understand both the challenges and the strengths, we can help kids feel supported and build on what they're naturally already good at. Next, we're going to go into behavioral needs. So, what are behavioral needs? When we talk about behavioral needs, we're not just describing a child being difficult. We're actually talking about patterns of behavior that interfere with learning, relationships, or daily functioning. Importantly, these behaviors are usually driven by something deeper, such as a communication challenge, sensory sensitivity, anxiety, past trauma, or mental health concerns. Research has consistently shown that behavior often functions as a form of communication, especially when some children don't yet actually have the skills to express their needs in other ways. And so I do always gently say and remind that we're not just asking what is the behavior, we're actually asking what is the child trying to tell us through this behavior, because behavior equals communication. These are some of the most common behavioral challenges that we see in schools at home. Of course, it's not an exhaustive list, but just some things that we see. So, children may struggle with self regulation, showing big emotions that they can't calm on their own. Sometimes this might look like aggression, defiance, like hitting, yelling, non-compliance. But research does show that these behaviors are often linked to underlying regulation difficulties, anxiety, or stress. We also might see anxiety driven behaviors. So things like meltdowns, school refusal, and withdrawal, they're not just misbehavior, they're actually signs that a child's system is overloaded. In fact, the recent research even shows that anxiety and trauma related factors play a big role in challenging behaviors for most children, including those with autism and ADHD. And so the takeaway is instead of focusing on only stopping the behavior, we need to uncover the why. Is the child anxious? Is the child overwhelmed by sensory input? Are they feeling frustrated because they don't understand the task that they were just given? So, when we shift from this surface level view to a deeper understanding, we can respond with support instead of punishment. So, next, we're going to go into talking a little bit about mental health. What is mental health? I know this is not a new concept to most people, and you've heard this in some capacity or another. The World Health Organization does have a definition, and they say that mental health is a state of well being in which the individual realizes their own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their community. This feels very wordy, so I like to break it down as the well being of a person's mind and emotions. It's how we think, how we feel, and how we behave on a daily basis. It also includes the way that we maybe feel about ourselves, as well as the way that we feel about others, and then how we manage feelings and how we deal with everyday difficulties. However, when a child or student's mental health is not positive or it's not in a great place, it really impacts things such as day to day life, relationships, So this can be friendships, romantic relationships, family, work, school. It can impact physical health, and it can impact general quality of life. And so the child may have difficulty managing their own emotions and coping with stress. The other thing that mental health includes is the ability to enjoy life and find the balance between the life activities and the effort to achieve something. And this is called resiliency. Think of this as the ability to recover quickly from difficulties, like a mental toughness, the ability to spring back and shift mindsets when things go wrong. And so then we see the shift from mental health to mental illness. And so when we see mental illness, what we're actually looking at is a syndrome that's characterized by clinically significant disturbance in a person's cognition, so thoughts, emotion regulation, or behavior. And there's usually a dysfunction in the psychological, biological, or developmental processes that actually underlie mental functioning. We also say that there usually is a significant distress associated with their mental health. And this can be in the social realm, the occupational. For kids, this will look like school, or other important activities. When we talk about child and youth mental health, we're talking about a wide range of conditions that can impact how children think, feel, and behave every single day. Anxiety is one of the most common, and it often shows up as avoidance, panic, or worries that feel very overwhelming. We also see depression. So this can look a little bit different in kids than it does in adults sometimes. So we might see the sadness, but we might also see things like irritability or withdrawal. ADHD brings challenges with things like attention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity or overactivity, as well as trauma-related concerns. So we can recognize and see that this shows up in hypervigilance, kind of looking around, always being on alert, being always turned on. We also can see strong emotional outbursts or difficulties trusting others. There is some recent Canadian research that shows that nearly 1 in 5 children and youth in Canada actually experience a diagnosable mental disorder. And yet, many do not receive treatment. And so, that gap in services is why knowing how to recognize and respond to mental health concerns is so crucial for parents, schools, as well as providers. When we talk about what can impact mental health, there are so many things, and the list goes on. But here are just a few of the things that could be happening to our kids. So, first, we might see grief, losing a family member, losing pets. This might also be grief around things like moving or losing friends. That doesn't necessarily mean that someone has passed away. Imprisonment, divorce and separation in the family. Negative family dynamics can include things like constant fighting in the home, tension in the home, witnesses of domestic violence, or experiences of family violence, bullying, long term physical illness, or even medical trauma, gender and sexuality, abuse that includes physical, emotional, sexual, psychological, financial, peer pressure from peers, school pressure that may come from the child themselves, but also from external sources. When we think about caretaker responsibilities, it can take a huge toll on children when they are expected to be taking care of others. Also, addictions, community violence, identity issues, a history of family mental health, stress, traumas, and just societal norms. And so that takes us to resources in Alberta. In Alberta, there are three main systems that families typically interact with. That is health, disability services, and education. So Alberta Health Services provides assessment, diagnoses, and treatment for children with autism, behavioral concerns, and mental health needs. The Family Support for Children with Disabilities program, better known as FSCD, is a provincial program that funds therapies, respite, and supports for eligible families. And of course, schools play a critical role through inclusive education, IPPs, and classroom supports. And so in Alberta, we see that these three systems are constantly intersecting. But from the family's perspective, these systems can feel very siloed and on their own and very disjointed. And so there was research actually that was gathered in Alberta from families accessing these supports, and they often reported significant stress when they were navigating fragmented services, particularly when eligibility and wait time was different across every service that they tried to access. And so the purpose of this following section is to kind of help bridge some of those gaps so families know how to access what's available. So, to start, we're going to look at health, mental health, and behavior supports that are community based. So, in addition to Alberta's provincial health system, families do have access to some community based organizations that can help children and teens. And so, these services range from everyday counseling to more specialized medical care. And we're going to go through each of them. So, to start, we have Alberta Health Services clinics across the province. In this case, we are typically looking at the Children and Youth Addictions and Mental Health Services. This is the main program through AHS that is going to provide mental health and addiction care for children, youth, and their families. So, what are some of the supports that they have? Well, they offer counseling. So, this can be individual, group, or family counseling to help with issues like anxiety, depression, trauma, substance use, or behavioral challenges. Next, we have psychiatric care. So, psychiatrists are medical doctors who specialize in mental health, and they can do things like assess, diagnose, and prescribe or even adjust medication as part of treatment. AHS typically likes to take what they call a team based approach. And so, this is having a multidisciplinary team, which may include individuals like a psychologist, social workers, nurses, occupational therapists, and addictions counselors. They do provide addiction services, so there are support available for young people who struggle with substance use. This may include things like early intervention, harm reduction, and family focused strategies to keep children safe while also building recovery skills. They do offer the community and clinic based support, so services can be provided in local clinics, schools, and sometimes directly in the community. This can also really help families access care without always having to have a hospital visit. And lastly, they support with referrals and navigation. So families can be connected to specialized programs such as inpatient care, which is short overnight stays in the hospital when needed, day treatment, or community agencies for extra support. The focus here is on early identification and treatment so that children and teens can receive the right help before problems get serious. And so under AHS, we have firstly something I want to talk about, which is called Access Open Minds. So they are actually a national youth mental health initiative with a site in Edmonton, and they run in partnership with AHS and as well as some community organizations. So it is designed specifically for people aged 11 to 25 as well as their families. And their original goal was they wanted to make support fast, youth friendly, and easy to access. So, unlike a lot of traditional services that had long waits, Access Open Minds aimed to actually provide an initial assessment within 72 hours of a family or individual reaching out. They also had youth-centered care, so they actually created a lot of their services with input from young people so that the space feels welcoming, it feels less clinical than a hospital setting, and they took into consideration what supports youth actually needed. They do have a range of supports, so there's mental health assessments, counseling, peer support, family support, and connections to physical health, employment, and housing resources. They also have a multidisciplinary team. So the care can involve, again, psychologists, social workers, nurses, psychiatrists, peer supporters, and other professionals working together. And family involvement. So they do include families when it comes to planning and support, and it kind of helps to strengthen the child or teens network of care. And one of the other things that Access Open Minds does is if a young person needs more specialized care, the team actually helps with referrals and smooth transitions into AHS or community programs. Another program through AHS is the U of A, so the University of Alberta Youth Focused Transformation Program. So this is a program that's connected with AHS and the U of A to bring together different professionals to provide team-based care for young people. So then we have some specialized centers that that support mental health and behavior supports that are community based. And so the big one is CASA Mental Health. So CASA is a specialized organization in Alberta. They focus only on children, youth, and families. They provide a wide range of services for kids struggling with mental health challenges. So, some of the things they provide are outpatient programs. So, this is where children, teens, families, they can come in for appointments with their counselors, with the psychologist, with the psychiatrist, but they continue living at home. So, just like a typical kind of drop in, do your appointment, and then go home. They also offer day programs. So these are very structured school like programs where children and youth will attend for the day with a focus on mental health. So they have intensive therapy and really good wraparound support, and then they still return home at night. They also have group therapy. So CASA offers groups for both children and parents, teaching things like coping skills, emotional regulation, and even strategies for improving overall family communication. There is also family support, so parents and caregivers are included in treatment, so they have education, guidance, and their own therapy to support their children in their recovery. CASA also offers specialized care, so there are psychiatrists and they do have assessments and treatment that include medication management when needed. They also partner with schools. So CASA actually works with teachers and schools so that children can receive coordinated care in the educational as well as the therapeutic setting. And so CASA's goal really was to bridge that gap between hospital-based services and community services, offering care that's intensive but still family-centered. Next, we have some crisis and support lines. So, to start, we have the Alberta Mental Health Helpline. And so, this is a toll free, available 24/7 number. Parents and youth can talk to trained professionals over the phone who can provide emotional support. They can also help assess the situation and connect families to local resources that are in their area. We have HealthLink, which is 811, and this is a 24/7 phone line where registered nurses and nurses will answer health questions. So families can also be connected to mental health and addiction services through them. The next one we have here is the Kids Help Phone. So they have a number that you can call, but you can also text the word connect to 686868. And so what this is it's a free confidential support that is available day and night. So children and teens can talk, text, they can also actually chat online on their website with a counselor. And so this is available all across Canada and can be used by any young people aged 5 through 29. There is also the Indigenous Hope for Wellness hotline, and they also have an online chat at hopeforwellness.ca. So this is a free 24/7 service for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people all across Canada. They offer immediate but also culturally safe support from counselors who understand Indigenous experiences. So families can call or use online chats to talk about mental health, wellness, grief, any crises, and they can also be connected to local resources as needed. And so now I want to share some information. So we're still looking at the community-based services, looking at the health, mental health, behavioral supports, but I wanted to chat about the Canadian Mental Health Association, or better known as CMHA here in Alberta. So CMHA is one of the longest standing nonprofits working in mental health across Canada. And here in Alberta, they've actually partnered with the Centre for Suicide Prevention, and their mission is to make sure that every Albertan has access to supports that they need for wellness, no matter where they live or what their circumstances are. So, I want to go through some of the programs that they offer for children and families that we can use for our students. So they offer mental health promotion, education, and prevention programs across the province. So they can not only work with families, but they work with schools and workplaces and communities to raise awareness, reduce stigma, and build practical skills for coping and resilience to support our kids. We know that in rural and remote communities, mental health resources can actually be very difficult to access. So, CMHA has a program called the Rural Mental Health Network, and it actually strengthens communities by training local people, supporting grassroots projects that exist in these communities, and then creating a network of resources. So, what this means is that children and families in small towns don't have to feel as isolated when they're looking for help. For our students that might be transitioning into post-secondary school, this might be a very big and sometimes quite scary experience. And so CMHA runs the Healthy Campus Alberta initiative. So it's a community of practice and it brings together colleges, universities, students, as well as staff to help improve mental health on campus. The focus is really on transforming campus culture. We know that being on campus can be isolating, it can be lonely, it can be a big change. And so the wellness and the inclusion and the early supports are built into the school environment. They have another program called the Recovery Colleges, and it's located in different parts of the province. They're free courses to anyone. And so what they do is they basically build on wellness skills, managing stress, and recovery. And so they're peer-based, meaning that the participants actually will learn not only from professionals, but from individuals who have lived experience. We know that parents and caregivers often also carry a big load. And so CMHA recognizes this, and they created something called the Caregiver Connections Program. And what that does is it provides peer support groups and education for those who are supporting individuals with mental health struggles. It's a safe place for families, caregivers to share some of their experiences and also reduce feelings of isolation and stress. CMHA also has a program that focuses on first responders, military personnel, and public safety workers. So it is called OSI CAN. And what it does is it provides peer support and community connections for, of course, the individual, but also the partner and the children. So if we have students who are going through some of these really stressful experiences with a parent, that is what this program is for. And as I mentioned, through the Center for Suicide Prevention, the CMHA provides training, workshops, and resources. So this is available to schools, it's available to agencies, workplaces, and of course, parents. Their job is they want to teach people how to recognize when someone might be at risk and how to have difficult conversations and then how to connect them to help. Often, as teachers, educators, support staff, service providers coming into the school, as parents, we are frontline. We are the first ones seeing this and the first ones that children come to, that students come to when they're struggling. And so having these pieces of knowing what to say and how to support can really make a difference for these kids. And so CMHA has resources designed to meet you wherever you're at. They have locations in Edmonton, Calgary, Red Deer, Lethbridge, Camrose, Grand Prairie, Fort McMurray, and Wood Buffalo. And then they also offer a lot of virtual supports for most of these programs. Next, I want to go into youth hubs. And so Youth Hubs was actually launched in 2021, also by CMHA, and it is a provincial initiative. And so the idea was that it was designed to make mental health and wellness services easy to access and all in one place. And so they were kind of meant to be a one-stop shop. And so they bring together things like counseling, physical health services, addiction supports, cultural programming, employment, education, all under one roof. And this helps families to reduce the need of having to go to several agencies to just access a couple of supports. So the spaces are designed to feel welcoming, safe, non-judgmental, more so like a community center as opposed to a clinic. And so they typically serve young people around the ages of 11 to 25. And they have cultural support. So many of the hubs actually partner with Indigenous and different cultural organizations just to provide programming that respects but also cultivates like identity and heritage and traditions. There is peer support, so a lot of young people can actually connect with trained peers who may have had similar lived experiences. This can help just reduce stigma and help them feel less alone. And then community partnerships. So the hubs do link health providers, schools, social services, and nonprofits all together so that the youth can move between services without actually falling through the cracks. And so one of the ones I wanted to talk about was called Kickstand Alberta. So it is a free youth-friendly network and it's designed for individuals aged 11 to 25. And so Kickstand wanted to bring all these supports into one place. They have mental health care. You can talk to a counselor for short-term therapy. You can talk to a peer support who has lived experience. You can attend group workshops on things like coping skills, stress, and healthy relationships. They also have physical health services, so walk in appointments may include checkups with nurses, doctors, basic medical care. They also have social and practical supports, so they help with things like employment, financial literacy, connecting individuals to housing or food if they need that. And so families don't need a referral from a doctor, and youth can access services typically in two ways. They can either walk right in or they can go on Kickstand Connect. So this is their virtual clinic online, and it offers free video sessions with counselors or peer supporters, plus tons of online workshops. And so their goal was to eliminate some of these wait lists and just make support a little bit more accessible and to help them get the right help at the right time. And so there is no referral needed, as I mentioned, and they typically can meet with someone that same day. So there are walk-in hubs. So there's one in West Edmonton Mall, in Edmonton, Bonnyville, Grand Prairie, Fort Saskatchewan, Drayton Valley, Strathmore, and Medicine Hat. Plus, as I mentioned, a provincial-wide virtual clinic called Kickstand Connect. Now, as we start to talk about some of the nonprofit and community organizations, the first one I wanted to touch on was the Family Resource Networks. So, what they are is they are government funded hubs across Alberta that support families with children from birth all the way up to age 18. So their purpose is prevention and early intervention. So they want to help families deal with problems before it becomes serious. There is approximately 70 family resource networks across Alberta, and there are several that are designed for rural communities, Indigenous families, newcomers, and Francophone families. And so they provide things like parenting support and workshops, so classes and one on one help with things like positive parenting strategies, child development, and coping tools. They also have things like developmental screeners, so they have tools to check for different milestones such as speech, motor skills, social skills, and they have the ability to refer if they believe a further evaluation is needed. There's also child and youth programs. So there's drop-in play groups, there's after-school programs, social skills groups, and youth leadership opportunities. We also know that sometimes for families with young children, it can be very difficult to leave the home to make an appointment. And so they often sometimes have the option for home visitation to provide education, coaching, and direct supports. And of course, the family resource networks can help families connect with other community or specialized services. So the support is free and it doesn't require a referral. And the families can kind of get help while they're waiting for hospital-based or very specialized programs that there might be a long wait for. And so how to find them is you just search online through the Alberta government's Family Resource Network map tool, and it helps the family find the hub that's closest to them. And so, alongside large organizations like CASA and CMHA, Edmonton area has many smaller community based nonprofits that actually focus on unique needs for specific groups of children and youth. And so, these groups can often provide culturally safe and identity affirming supports that help our students and children feel not only understood, but also accepted. So we have for newcomers and refugee families, organizations like the Edmonton Immigrant Services Association and Catholic Social Services. They offer things like settlement support, language programs, and counseling that recognizes the stress of things like migration, cultural adjustment, and trauma potentially coming from those countries. For Indigenous youth and families, we have groups such as Bent Arrow Traditional Healing Society. They provide programs grounded in Indigenous culture, teachings, and ceremony. And so it can include things like elder support, youth groups, mentorship, as well as culturally adapted counseling. For LGBTQ2S plus youth, we have the Institute for Sexual Minority Studies and Services and community spaces such as the Pride Center of Edmonton, offering drop-ins, peer mentorship, counseling, and family support. There are also several smaller community-led programs that often run out of drop-in centers, and they can include things like mentorship groups, homework clubs, or cultural programming that can help our students just feel connected and supported. And so I often say, reach out to the community. Look into programs that are offered at community halls because they often can just be a pop-up. And Facebook is a surprisingly popular platform for groups as well as finding different events that are happening in your community. So I encourage families to look up and search, community groups of their neighborhood, community groups for culture, religion, etc., and just see what's offered out there because there is more than we think. So, as we move into the community based services for autism and developmental services, well, the first one is, as I mentioned earlier, FSCD, so Family Support for Children with Disabilities. A lot of people may not actually know what they do. So, what they are is they are a provincial government program here in Alberta, and they provide supports for families who are raising children with a diagnosed disability. And it can include things like autism, Down syndrome, developmental delays, physical disabilities, or other long term conditions. And so their programming is about partnering with families so that children can develop to their potential and access support so that parents don't feel alone. And so, what do some of these supports look like from FSCD? Well, they start with developmental goal planning. So, families will work with an FSCD caseworker to create an individualized family support plan, and that identifies the student's strengths, needs, and family goals. There may be in-home support staff, so workers may come into the home to provide things like hands-on support, skill building, supervision. There may be options for respite, so gives parents and caregivers breaks, but also ensuring that the child is safe and cared for. It can be through home and sometimes through approved respite programs. They may offer specialized services, so access to professionals such as speech language pathologists, occupational therapists, behavior specialists when needed. FSCD may sometimes help cover costs for adaptive equipment, home modifications, or transportation supports that can improve accessibility. And sometimes FSCD can cover child related costs, so things like extra childcare needs, special programming fees, or unique expenses related to the disability. And so, how does it work? So, families actually directly apply through the Alberta government FFCD program online. And so, a medical or developmental diagnosis is typically required. And so, if approved, a family will receive a caseworker. Together, the caseworker and the family create what I said earlier, which is a family support services agreement or individualized support plan, and it details what types of services will be provided. So then services are delivered either directly through the program or by funding agencies and providers that the family accesses. For FSCD, plans are regularly reviewed and adjusted as the child grows or needs changes depending on the circumstances. And so things that families may want to know is that the wait lists are high. The program is in high demand, and families do often experience delays after applying. In terms of eligibility, they do often say that they need a confirmed diagnosis, and some children may not qualify depending on the diagnosis. And so that is determined by FSCD themselves. Flexibility. So it is important to keep in mind that no two families will receive the exact same set of support. So if you know someone who has an FSCD contract, it will not look the same as yours because it's dependent on need. And then it's also a partnership approach. So parents are expected to be active partners in identifying goals and shaping the plans. Next, we have the Center for Autism Services Alberta. So they are a nonprofit organization with offices in Edmonton, surrounding areas, and in Calgary. And they provide what they call a lifespan approach. Essentially, what that means is they have supports available from very early childhood through to adulthood. So some of the key programs and services that they offer are early childhood programs. So typically designed for children before they enter school. It's focused on things like play-based learning, communication, and social skill development. Parents are often involved and their learning strategies that are used at home. They also offer clinical services, so therapy from trained professionals, which can include behavior therapy, speech language therapy, and occupational therapy. Services are again tailored to each child's goal, so it can be things like building communication, self regulation, or daily living skills. The Center for Autism Services Alberta also offers community rec and social programs. So, after school programs, sports, arts, and social groups. So, these are really great spaces for children and teens to practice social skills, but also having fun. It helps reduce isolation and builds friendships through them. They also have independent living and employment programs. So there are supports for older teens and young adults, with the focus being on building skills for independence. Cooking, managing money, navigating transportation. They also have employment readiness programs for things like workplace skills, job coaching, and then connecting youth to various employment opportunities. The Center for Autism also offers summer and respite programs, so day camps, recreation programs during the summer and school breaks. And so, how does a family access these services? Each program and each service at the Center for Autism varies in terms of accessibility. So there is no referral needed. Families can directly contact them. You don't need a doctor's referral, so you can either call the main office on their website or you can fill out actually an online intake form. And then intake staff will gather information about, the child, the family needs, and then guide towards programs. And so eligibility, the programs are dependent, so they are typically open to children and youth with a formal diagnosis of autism, but some recreational and community programs may also accept participants without a diagnosis. And so these conversations are usually had during the screening and the intake to determine eligibility. And so then the funding can depend, right? As I mentioned, it's going to be determined during that meeting, but it can be paid privately and it can also be paid and covered through FSCD or other funding streams. Next, we talk about the Autism Society of Alberta, so ASA. They are a provincial network that connects individuals and families to autism resources. So they help parents find services and supports in their own communities. They offer community and education programs, social groups, and events, and that actually helps build connection among families to not feel as isolated, to talk about support as well. They also do advocacy, so they work with the government and service providers to actually access more autism services across Alberta. And so families can connect with nearby chapters. So they have local chapters in different cities and towns for things like peer support and community events. And families just have to go online to find their closest chapter. So next we have the Society for Autism Support and Services. And this is an organization based in Calgary, serving individuals with autism as well as related developmental needs. So they have early intervention, so supports for, again, young children to build those communication and developmental skills. They do have out of home living programs, so there are safe housing or group home options for children, youth, or adults who perhaps can't live at home full time. They do skill development and work readiness, so programs that teach independent skills, and they also prepare older youth for things like employment. There's counseling and consultation, so support for families and individuals who are managing complex needs. And they do the community education, so again, building awareness and inclusion. Very similar to the Center for Autism, you can contact them directly. There's no need for a physician or professional referral. You can call them directly through their website contact form. There is again an intake process for basic information, and then an intake coordinator typically would schedule a meeting to learn about the child's needs and explain the options that may be available to the family. And so again, that intake team does determine whether the individual will meet criteria for specific programming. So we also have the Children's Autism Services of Edmonton. And so they are a local organization in Edmonton that focuses on therapy, education, and family supports. So they have specialized therapies, so speech language, occupation, behavioral. They do educational strategies, so they do collaborate with schools and teachers to help adapt learning to the child's needs. They do parenting support, so training and workshops to help parents learn strategies to support their child's development at home. And community programs, so they have playgroups, social skills programs, and respite opportunities. So again, you can just reach out directly and you don't need a referral. The first step is the intake, followed by an intake coordinator meeting to gather the information. And then eligibility is again based on diagnoses and from what the coordinator says. And there may be some options that are available without a diagnosis that the coordinator could explain. And the last community-based service I want to talk about here was the Glenrose Rehabilitation Hospital. So the Glenrose is under AHS, but they provide specialized medical and developmental support for children and adults with disabilities, including autism and developmental delays. So they have multidisciplinary teams that assess children for autism and other developmental conditions. They have speech therapy, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, and psychology services. They can do evaluation and provide access to devices that might help with communication, mobility, or daily living. They also have programs that teach parents strategies and connect them to resources. And they have specialized clinics. So, for example, there are feeding and swallowing clinics, mobility assistive technology clinics that they can connect to as well. So for the Glenrose, there does have to be a referral that is typically from the physician, pediatrician, or another healthcare professional. They have to submit a referral on your behalf to the Glenrose for a specific program. And the referrals are typically screened and then determined for eligibility as well as urgency. And then, if accepted, families are then placed on a wait list for assessment or therapy services. And so, this one, as I mentioned, very specifically has to come from that referral. So, it is important that families are getting that referral from their medical providers. So schools are often some of the front line when it comes to support, and sometimes even the first. So Alberta follows what we call an inclusive education model, meaning that students with diverse learning and behavior needs are supported in the regular classroom alongside their peers when possible. So instead of separating students into specialized programs, schools try to adapt teaching strategies, classroom environments, and supports so that students can participate and have that sense of belonging. And so the focus then shifts to strengths, equity, and removing barriers as opposed to fitting students into a one size fit all program. And so, for students with unique learning or behavior needs, the school can develop or implement something called an IPP or a BSP, so an individualized program plan or behavior support plan. And it outlines things like goals, accommodations, supports. Essentially, what it is a personalized roadmap that outlines the student's strengths, challenges, goals, accommodations, and strategies for success in the classroom. So, it may include things like academic modifications, behavior support strategies, or assistive technologies. And IPPs are reviewed regularly with input from teachers, parents, support staff, and sometimes even the student, just ensuring that the plan evolves as it changes. And so these IPPs are brought to families from the inclusive ed or spec ed coordinators. It typically is something that has to be identified by the school in order to be provided for the child in collaboration with the parents and caregivers. And so schools in Alberta have a range of support staff who directly support students. So this can be things like educational assistants, learning coaches, school psychologists, speech language pathologists, occupational therapists, and they're all vital in helping implement these plans. Collaboration is also key when it comes to supporting students with different complex needs. Teachers, parents, caregivers, any specialists like psychologists, occupational therapists, speech therapists, they come together to share ideas and they build a consistent plan that works for the student. So, keeping regular communication between school and home actually keeps everyone on the same page. And when needed, schools can also help outside agencies such as FSCD or community mental health providers. And so this team approach actually creates what we call wraparound services. And so that provides the student with services all around them so that they can be successful both at home and at school. So ASCA, so the Association of Independent Schools and Colleges in Alberta, actually works to support both parents who are home educators as well as children who attend the independent schools. And they have a ton of resources. So one of the biggest resources for home educators is Open Parachute. This is a free online mental health and well-being program that's available for children ages 5 to 18. So what it does is it utilizes short videos and lessons with real youth actually sharing their experiences, followed by discussion guides and activities for parents and students to complete together. Topics in Open Parachute include things like resiliency, growth mindset, dealing with anxiety, making friends, and staying motivated. And so the goal of the program is to help children thrive emotionally within the academic setting. Parents can also benefit from things like workshops, coaching, resource guides that help them better understand how to support their child's learning at home. And so ASCA really emphasizes giving parents the tools to not only teach with confidence, but to support and meet their child's complex needs effectively. And then we can see through the expanding capacity for learning supports, the ECLS program, ASCA also really helps families in the independent schools and early childhood services. So this means that parents can access professional supports in areas such as speech language, occupational and physical therapy, mental health services, and literacy and numeracy support when appropriate. There are also specialized services for low incidence needs, such as vision, hearing impaired, and assistive communication. And so, to access these supports, parents can actually register directly. So, any family and any child under the ASCA mandate can register. So, parents and caregivers can just go on the website and register for Open Parachute at any time. They can also speak to their home education provider or facilitator or the school to connect with appropriate learning supports through the ECLS. ASCA also can provide contact information for, project managers who can actually guide families to the right services. And so overall, ASCA's parent and caregiver supports are designed to really empower families. They want to make sure and recognize that children have diverse needs, and they want to give parents the confidence as well as the resources to help their kids succeed academically and emotionally. So on paper, the referral process in Alberta looks very linear. And so I wanted to outline what the typical process looks like. So it starts off with a parent notices a concern, and so they speak with their family physician, who then typically refers them to a pediatrician or a specialist, and then that child might then be referred to an AHS clinic, CASA, perhaps a psychological assessment. If a diagnosis is made, families can then apply for something that could be funded, such as FSCD, something that's covered by community care. And then, schools play that critical role where teachers notice the struggles, and so schools may recommend a assessment, and that can guide the development of an individualized program plan. However, as many families know, and as many teachers and service providers know, the system very rarely feels this straightforward. And actually, there was some research done in Alberta that showed that families frequently actually experience what they call fragmented pathways, meaning that they are being put down these different paths and not really sure where to go. They're also being hit with long wait lists, unclear roles between health, education, and community services. And so, although this is what we call the formal pathway, this is very rarely how it actually goes. And so it's important to explain what's actually out there and who to ask for help from. And so the reality for families and schools and community services is that it's not straightforward and it's almost never the straight line. And so waitlists can be overwhelming. People are given conflicting or different information. And so knowing what to do while you wait is also a very critical piece. And so families can tap into community organizations, so such as Autism Edmonton, Family Resource Networks, Kickstand Alberta, respite programs. Some families may choose to actually go the private route. So that means that they actually pay for assessments or therapy to speed things up. Private care can be costly. However, sometimes programs such as FSC or even private health benefits and insurance can help to cover part of the expense. While you wait, there's also online training, support groups, skill building programs, several ones that I went over earlier that you can do while you wait. And also advocacy can make a huge difference while you wait. But families and schools and providers don't always know what to ask. And so asking direct questions like, what services can we access while we wait? Or who else can I talk to? Even something as simple as, is there a community program or funding we haven't looked into, can open doors. And so, of course, I can't go in this presentation without talking about some of the challenges and barriers when it comes to navigating supports in Alberta. I consistently am told that one of the hardest parts of our system is the wait. Waiting for an assessment, waiting for therapy, and it can stretch months to years. And this can feel incredibly stressful when it feels like the child needs help and support now. The other thing is that eligibility criteria can vary. What qualifies a child for FSCD may not qualify them for an AHS program or school supports. What qualifies one child may not qualify another child. And so inconsistency can also add confusion and frustration to this. We also acknowledge that cultural and social economic barriers can be a big part of this. Families that are new to Canada anyone that has limited financial resources, they may not have the same access to services. And so something as simple as transportation or language can make supports just feel completely out of reach. And finally, we know that stigma is still a major barrier. Misconceptions about autism, mental health, and behavior challenges means that some families are hesitant to seek help, or they even actually feel judgment when they do. And so, as we come to the end, I just wanted to highlight a few big takeaways. So, the earlier children are identified and connected with supports, the better the outcomes are for their development, their learning, and their mental health. No one system can meet these needs alone. And so, schools, families, and community organizations have to work together. In Alberta, we have strong resources, but families, schools, service providers need guidance to kind of find and access them. And finally, advocacy and persistence make a difference. Families who ask questions, keep records, build strong partnerships do find success in moving through the system. And so I encourage you that, of course, part of this is to understand the system, but also encouraging everyone that you don't have to do it alone. There are resources out there, there is collaboration out there, and there are other families to connect with as well. I just wanted to say a big thank you for everyone attending today and the work that you do to support children and families. I know that these challenges can sometimes feel just so overwhelming, but the message I wanted to leave with you is just this: you're not alone, the supports are available, and together, schools, families, providers, and communities, we can make a real difference when we connect. And just a final note, if you would like a summary handout for this presentation, we just ask that you email us at workshop@con-services.com. You'll receive a link to just a really short survey, and as soon as you complete the survey, you'll receive a link for the handout for this presentation. And so again, I just wanted to say thank you for everything that you're already doing for the children and the families in your care.